Lorne had never considered himself a coward. When he first discovered his gift for magic, he proudly walked up to the Collegiate Arcane. He remembered staring up at the headmaster and proclaiming how he would tear apart the enemies of Sigmar with the very winds of magic at his command. The headmaster nodded knowingly, used to the arrogance of youth. As he grew, it came as no surprise to him that he excelled in pyromancy. The magics of the winds of fire called to him and made him believe he was invincible. He imagined himself burning corrupted monsters of chaos and laying low the bestial forces of destruction. When he came of age and completed his initial assessments, he demanded to immediately be sent out to the field, to finally have his gifts be used as they should, as Sigmar willed it. Despite his youth, the War Council agreed, assured that his natural gift for spellcraft would compensate for his lack of experience. He was tasked with accompanying a force of Free Guild patrolling a wooded section of Akshai. The ash trees there a valuable commodity in a realm lacking an abundance of forests. When he arrived after traveling through several realm gates, he joined and marched proudly with the Free Guild, hoping every day to fight a worthy enemy and unleash his fire upon them. And every day the forest was quiet and peaceful. As the men and women of the Free Guild thanked the stars for the lack of action, the young battle mage prayed to Sigmar to send something for him to burn. It was on the second day of the third week that he received his wish. A horn bellowed across the air, as the Free Guild were performing combat drills in the middle of the day. The deep and disturbing sound seemed to give the very air a malignant presence. From the surrounding trees came the sound of hooves crashing through the brush, followed quickly by the beasts of chaos those sounds belonged to. A Warherd. Muscle-bound horned monsters screamed out for the blood of their enemies, their eyes colored red with blood greed, the insatiable urge for flesh that turned these creatures into raging berserkers. An urge that could only be satisfied by taking out the ill-prepared humans before them. While most around him felt fear, Lorne felt joy. Now was his moment. Now was his chance to show the Free Guild the power he would give for Sigmar. As he raised up his hands to unleash fire upon the beasts, a giant creature stepped through the trees and made Lorne's heart stop. It was a Sigor, a massive bull creature with one cyclopean blind eye, a white twitchy orb that was staring directly at him. Lorne knew of Sigors. Effectively blind, their sight only allowed them to see powerful sources of magic. Like, for example, a young and eager battle mage bursting with energy. Frozen in fear, Lorne realized too late as that same Sigor flung a giant rune-covered boulder in his direction. Lorne ran into the Free Guild forces behind him, shoving past gunners trying to acquire shots as he heard the whistle of the Sigor's boulder coming closer. He barely made it before the boulder crashed down, crushing the soldiers underneath it into a wet, meaty paste, shocking the rest of the Free Guild in the army. Before the Free Guild could rally, the Warherd was upon them. Gunners tried to aim, but the shock of the assault threw them off. Any shots that hit barely slowed the creatures down as they continued slaughtering all around them. Bulgors went to great sword companies, chopping those soldiers in half with giant axes and, in some cases, ripping off arms and legs with their bare hands. The officer in command tried to rally those under him, yelling out unheeded commands into the air. All it did was attract a doom bull. The war leader of this Warherd, it was clad in battered armor and had the skulls of various races on ropes across its body. To his credit, the officer did not back down. He raised up his sword arm and began to speak, the first words of a challenge on his lips. The Doom Bull didn't let him finish. Not even bothering to use his axe, the Doom Bull simply kicked the man, toppling him on the ground and making him spit out a torrent of blood. Before the officer could get back up, the Doom Bull began stomping on him, raising his hoof into the air before bringing it down over and over again. At that point, Lorne had already fled into the forest, hearing the screams of those he was sworn to protect lessen behind him as he moved further away. Several hours later, as night approached, Lorne finally decided to sit down. He was exhausted. He had traveled as far as he could from the massacre that had happened behind him. As he laid his head on his hands and wondered what he would do next, he heard familiar hoof steps behind him. The hoof steps of a monster that had apparently chased him down despite the easier pickings on the previous battlefield. Through the trees walked a Sigor, its cyclopean eyes still staring once again at Lorne. Lorne was too tired to run, and even if he had the energy, he knew he would not. He had failed those under his command, and worse, he had shamed himself in the eyes of his god Sigmar. He would end this creature here, and enact penance by destroying the Warherd after. Raising his hands, he unleashed a firestorm. Every iota of power within him was unleashed on the Sigor. All his rage and shame and pain coalescing into a flame that burned brighter than any fire he had ever made before. This torrent of burning emotion continued until the Sigor's hand passed through it and grasped Lorne around his waist, trapping his arms in the process. Screaming out in pain, he felt his insides being crushed as the beast's massive fist began to squeeze, breaking bones and rupturing his organs. A wave of pain that mercifully ended when the Sigor placed the former battle mage into its maw and began to chew, consuming his flesh and feasting on his soul. Beasts and monsters, the creatures of the Warherds have one overriding urge: to feast on the flesh of their enemies. This urge, known as blood greed, leads them to travel the realms in search of new flesh, always willing to fight for new bodies to consume. An urge abused by the chaotic champions they encounter, more than willing to use the brutal chaotic creatures as shock troops in their own wars. A use the Warherds have no problem with, as it will simply mean more flesh to consume. At the height of this blood greed, when the Warherd sees the enemy in front of them, all of its members see nothing before them but their next meal. Pain becomes a useless sensation, and fear is an emotion that becomes foreign to their psyche. All that is left is to fill their need for battle, and to rip off the flesh of their enemies' corpses. The largest of the Bulgors, the Doom Bulls are the main leaders of any Warherd, although it doesn't lead through charisma or even the less subtle posturing of the Uroks. It leads through instinct, calling its horde like an alpha predator leading its forces to prey, charging from the front to be the first to rip apart its enemies with its giant weapons or massive horns. Below the Doom Bull are the Bulgors, the main bulk of the Warherd forces. They are each massive beasts of muscle and hunger, always willing to follow their Doom Bull to their next meal. It is said that while most large Bulgors become Doom Bulls and take up the mantle of leadership amongst its kin, a rare few have an even deeper connection to their blood greed. Mad with bestial hunger, they feast on their lesser king in an orgy of violence that ends a tribe but births a monster. This Bulgor becomes a Gorgon, the consumed flesh of his kin turning into a massive beast of war. Multi-armed, larger and more powerful than any Bulgor, and utterly controlled by its hunger. Willing to eat anything, including its own Warherd brethren, to sate it. As large as the Gorgon, but after very different prey are the Sigors. Cursed to blindness when it comes to mundane sights, they can only see the magic that flows in the very air. A state that inevitably drives them mad as the demons of chaos constantly flicker in and out of its senses, both to cause it pain, but also to lead it towards areas that would suit their own dark purposes. Such sight also allows it to see mages like bright beacons in a sea of darkness, unleashing a hunger in them that nothing can stop. Crushing into obstacles they can't see to get to its prey, it will stop at nothing to catch the magic user. Once it catches an unlucky mage, it immediately devours him or her, eating the flesh and consuming the poor mage's soul, trying to fill a magical hunger that can never be sated. To be a member of the Warherd is to be a beast of pure rage and chaos. To rip apart your enemies with the wrath of a predator, and consume their flesh to fill an insatiable hunger. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this story about the Warherd, who in Age of Sigmar are just terrible, scary, powerful monsters. If you really like it, please consider subscribing, liking, or commenting. And if you really like it, please consider joining my Patreon. With the extra money, it helps give me the time I need to work on these writing projects of mine that I'd love to do. Anyway, thanks for listening, and see you next time.